Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dynamic Character Productions After the Snuff, talking our seventh mini, Como Bluff. I'm your host, John Millsip, joined by our second and third boot of the season, two fantastic people who unfortunately had their time cut short. We have Margret and Logan here today. How are you two doing?
Uh,
Good.
yeah, definitely,
Kind of relieved.
definitely sped run through my elimination episode, but otherwise I'm fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair. At least you watch it. There are some people who never watch their elimination episodes because it's too much. So taking that time to go through it hopefully gives you a little insight into your game and gives us some fun things to talk about. Before we get going here, Margret, I mean, we have to address like the elephant in the room, right? You're one of our four returning players, our fossils, as we deem them. No matter like how you want to feel about that term, I guess. But how did it feel coming back to DCP after all this time?
It felt good to finally be able to uh come back and give this a whirl. I mean, of course, I wish I had come back for the longer All Stars game, but at that time, I had a lot of very intense family life stuff that I was like, I'm not in the headspace. So I was glad it's like, okay, carve out an afternoon. Let's see how I do in a mini versus a long game. Obviously, we saw what the result of that experiment was, but I'm glad I gave it a whirl.
We were so happy to have you back, of course. And we're definitely going to dive into those differences between. Actually, let's just go into it right now. How did you feel the game differentiates between the long game you played versus this mini?
There, I would say with a long game, it's a double-edged sword of how much time you have to dedicate to it. Because of course, the fact that there's at least a day between a challenge and a vote, like that at least gives. Yes, there's a lot of breathing room for anxiety to build, but it's also breathing room that you have to reach out and see what what magic you can work if maybe you're if like I was feeling like I was on the bottom or trying to fight for somebody else, as opposed to a mini where I mean there was a whole lot that I underestimated, but one thing I underestimated is how like you really don't have time to talk, and it's better to be bold, like bold, not aggressive, but just bold. So that's definitely something I know now.
I think it's a really good differentiation there about like the differentiation between bold and aggressive. Because I think a lot of people feel when you get into these minis and you have to like throw out a name right away, you have to be aggressive with it and like just stick to that name, which we kind of saw happen with that first vote that you were involved with, Logan. And but instead, like you have to be bold. You just have to be confident in what you're saying and stick to it and not push it. Be flexible still, but you have the courage to say a name because there are so many times where it's just like that first name that gets said is what happens. And we saw that kind of formulating in this episode, Margret, where you say Emily's name, which we're going to get into that, don't worry. But that does pick up traction until all of a sudden JB kind of starts pushing back on you instead. So having that courage to say a name is dangerous because it can put you into that position where all of a sudden you're being looked at differently. You're being looked at as a target, maybe. But it's also necessary because otherwise you just sit in a room with seven people and no one's saying anything.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Well, speaking of that first vote, Logan, well, we start this episode two with you talking about your decision to go against the coin flip. So why don't you just walk us through that entire situation from that last episode? What was going through your head as
Yeah,
the coin flip was suggested, and then ultimately your decision to go against it?
yeah. Um, I talked about this actually with one of my coworkers last night, and I kind of said what I said in confessional about coin flips, where like you decide kind of midair when the coin is flipping what your preference would be. And it so that being said, there is another kind of thing that I've noticed with these mini games sometimes, and especially one like DCP, respectfully, that people know each other here. Like I saw the episode where Beth and Connor like made their connection about like Beth's brother and all that. And so even when I play, there might be a lot of like East Coast people or New Jersey or something.
Mhm.
And so me being in Oregon and Brien being in Seattle, that little like Northwest connection at least. I always even just look for West Coast people. And then little mini games like this in first round, it really does go off something as simple as that, as like, cool, you live 6 hours away from me, which is close to me. Like, works for me. I'll take it. And so I do kind of regret doing the Hinky vote because like as we saw in episode 3, it like I kind of like let it fully derail my game. Um, I also just wish that I could have like said something even just like because I think that's kind of like a harmless reason. Just to say, yeah, he lives close to me. I don't think anyone would have been super threatened by that. Um, yeah, I don't know. Just stir a little chaos.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have someone stirring chaos who's suggesting coin flips, anyways. But did it ever cross your mind after the coin flip and you kind of decided, no, I kind of want to vote Brien out instead of David? Did you ever have that conversation with anyone? Did you have an opportunity to have that conversation with anyone? How close was it to tribal council, if you remember?
I didn't have the opportunity to tell anyone. It was just kind of something in my head that I figured I would do. Um, maybe it's that 7 a.m. brain.
Mhm.
I wasn't fully awake and making informed decisions. Um, I don't know. Thought I'd have some fun.
Well, as we progress through the episode, we have Meredith talking about the fact that her name also came up as one of the votes. Isn't really concerned about it because there was that 5 who decided to vote for David, even though it only ended up being 4. And just that conversation of, like we were saying, in a mini, sometimes you just get bad. There's a lot of luck that goes into Survivor, and sometimes you have the bad luck of being the person who's pulled away when everyone starts deciding to talk about strategy. And that's kind of
Yeah,
what happened with David and Brien here, why they were the names that were up in the first place, and just how the game goes sometimes, right? Uh, and I don't know how Logan, you were also talking about like that proximity is helpful because like in the org world, we do get a lot of East Coast people. We do get a lot of people in that like Northeast United States who end up playing these.
hmm
And I mean, on DCP, we luckily have um, you know, Pacific Northwest contingency now
you're a
too.
West Coaster. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like we
exactly.
have that
Hell yeah.
Pacific Northwest contingency. I mean, it helps that I'm just recruiting everyone in Victoria to play the game, but we also have a large group of people from Seattle and just reaching out to Oregon with you now. It's that proximity is enough to connect people in that first round.
Totally.
And unfortunately, that one connection you get with someone is pushed away because they happen to be out of the room when this group of 5 just decides we have to vote for someone and we're a majority.
Yeah. And like for the first round, I guess I didn't want to be the person immediately to like to say no and speak up. Um, even though I think someone was looking for that. Like uh we were looking for that kind of direction. We needed someone to make a decision.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes along. And then we even see Connor's confessional being like, I came into the game deciding I wanted to throw chaos. We happen to be talking about geese. I'm looking at this loony on my desk. It's time to flip it. Did you have any thought process like this was a chaotic moment in the game, or did it just kind of feel like, okay, this is what Connor's going for, and it's because it's the first vote, it doesn't feel like chaos, it's like just trying to make a decision?
Little column A, little column B. It's like, is this a super chaotic way to make a decision? Absolutely. But like, are we making a decision right now? Is this 5 people that I did feel good about moving forward with? Like that would have been my alliance had I not gotten swapped with like everyone else. So um, yeah, I think it was just a safe move. And then the more it had just like settled, it's almost like when the plan gets set too early, then you're just kind of like, should we? Is that really what
Mhm.
we should do? Should we try something else? So I think I just kind of let that part take over.
Yeah, and that's
I
totally fair. Again, like Margaret said, right? It's that bold, not aggressive. And if everyone else is already doing something, it's safer sometimes in this first vote not to push anything instead when the name's already out there.
right, and I mean even I, my mistake after this mistake was telling people that I'd voted for Brien. I could have
Mhm.
easily just like hid with that and like denied that for the rest of the game. But I think once that word got out, like I saw in episode 3, like Julia eventually kind of like saying like, yeah, well, like Logan went against the plan on the first vote, so like
Mhm.
that's more reason to get him out. So um, I do think it was funny that Brien voted for me. I'm like very happy that I was at least like correct on that call, and so that everything else I was saying wasn't like total bullshit. Um, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting too. Just like during that third round, just like skip ahead a bit, like seeing the way Brien was just kind of acting as kind of like, oh, like I don't understand why Logan's coming for me. It's
Mhm.
like, dude, yes, like you don't know that I know, but you wrote my name down, so
Yeah,
like don't let's not do that.
absolutely. So then we see Brian gets the legacy advantage from David. Uh,
Yeah,
it's kind of
hilarious, ironic.
serendipitous there, I guess.
Not even
Uh,
mad. It's perfect TV.
and then we get to the immunity challenge. And as we start the immunity challenge, we get into, you get to choose a dig site. Margret, how was your feelings about the dig site? And how were you approaching that in this early portion of the game?
My approach with that is if I found an advantage, I found an advantage, but I I don't know, there's more brilliant people when it comes to that trinket collecting than me, so I didn't necessarily want to rely on that as a strategy, just more like if I got lucky, I got lucky. I mean, hey, I was on the Monte Carlo season. That was our whole theme. So and yeah, so like I what I appreciate about DCP though is like y'all don't go as um idols everywhere or like trying to incorporate any of the new era like beware or anything like that. You don't like there's just
Mhm.
enough to keep it a little spicy but not overly reliant on treasure hunting, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we like having strategy. Like we like living by the mantra of let the players play as much as possible. We got to throw things in there once in a while to spice it up, but we don't want to be too inundated with uh advantages unless like that's kind of what we're going for. Like we kind of did that in Moneta Bank, right? Where it's like, okay, we'll put a lot of advantages in this game, and it kind of changes the game and the way it's played a little bit. But this time we really wanted to dial it back a bit, make it a little easier. I mean, we even saw the advantage that Julia gets, the question advantage, is a completely different type of advantage than any
Mhm.
we've really seen, where it's like, here's knowledge and it's not impacting things, but it gives an opportunity to learn something as we see her use it in episode 3 and just ask when the merge is. That is some pretty pivotal information to have right after a swap. So it makes sense to use it that way. Um, in Tribal Council, in the one where you go out, Margaret, there is conversation about the dig site. Was there any conversation during the scramble time, like people comparing notes at all, or did it just seem like everyone kind of like acknowledges the dig site exists, but they're still not comfortable enough with people to give any information?
Yeah, I think everyone was, without saying anything, clearly on the same page as far as like we're not talking about that. Like we're too big of a group to like be talking about this right now.
Mhm.
Which is like totally what like so like when you see JB talk about like he's like I'm not ready to talk about my advantage with anybody. I'm like yeah, that absolutely like if I yeah, that's exactly how I would have approached it too. Like I'm just like I like a lot of people here, but I don't know if I trust like am willing to like take that leap of faith with trusting someone with that information yet.
Mhm.
That said, I don't know how like there was when we were like the winning tribe and we were in the holding room. Richard actually started bringing up it's like oh I hope our side is the one with the advantages, and so he was already starting that to get that ball rolling, and the fact that he started it, I was immediately like clocking. I was
Mhm.
clocking. I was like, "Oh, you're going to be the person that's like good at that." I don't know how I feel about it yet. I'm just noticing.
Let's get into this immunity challenge. So it's artifact recall. In this, the tribes will divide into 3 groups of 2. And within those groups of 2, one person has to hold up 3 dice with a pencil, while the other person takes the time to memorize um, an order of just objects with orientation mattering a lot in this. And then when they're either ready or the person holding the dice drops, then they go back. They have to recreate that sequence of objects. And if they get it wrong, they got to go back, do it again, try to figure out what they got wrong, and keep doing that. This continues until one tribe gets 3, and then it's a win. Margret, we saw in the episode, like, part of the reason why your name was coming up was like your struggle holding these dice up. So talk to me about the planning for this strategy and just the decision to hold the dice. And was it really as bad as JB kind of made it out, or was JB kind of embellishing it to make it easier to get your name out?
I mean, I think it was very clear in the challenge, like if there was technically a weak link, yeah, it was me, but also I wasn't embarrassing myself.
Mhm.
So it's like, as Logan said, a little column A, a little column B. My first bad decision of that round was not being the one who sat out. I should have been bold and said, "I'll sit out." Not deliberately put myself in any hero or failure kind of role on that because there's a way I did it. I would have probably been better being a memorizer than
Mhm.
that, but I also, as we say, like I maybe in a mini we're not going to trust Margaret's memory.
Fair enough. Logan, what was your experience with this challenge? How did it feel for you?
I remember I think being pretty good at it. Um, yeah, I'll be fully honest. I think I skipped episode 2, which I feel kind of bad about.
No, it's all good. It
Um,
happens. There's a lot of life in
um,
the way sometimes.
yeah. Well, I knew that was around that we had immunity on, so I was like, what are they going to show from us? Maybe I should go back and I give you guys the views and
Oh, there's some
speaking about.
There's some Jews from y'all's tribe that
Oh,
Well, speaking
trying to
of
remember
Jews
now.
from
Anyways,
the Ardonis
yeah.
tribe, let's dive into that because Ardonis does win immunity here. They are safe from the vote, sending Tarshia to tribal council. And we immediately go into one of the best confessionals we've ever had. I can't even hold it back. Sorry, Brien, I'm going to just gush about you here. Brien's confessional about being the one who's going to be feared or should be feared and is going to be running shot throughout the game. Uh, Fantastic. Brien, like the character Brien is bringing is so good. There's this hectic energy to him, which I'm sure, Logan, you clocked immediately
Yeah.
upon scrambling with him. It's just, it's so interesting to see this type of character popping out in a confessional. And it feels like he's going 110 miles an hour the entire time. Uh,
Nice.
we get a little bit of conversation on the Ardonis tribe. You know, Julia is kind of feeling good about Connor, and Erin, someone she'd like rather keep close than be against, but she is a little wary of them because, you know, they could be strong, and a little wary of Brien too. And that's part of that, like you were mentioning, Logan, like your community is really small. These people kind of know, at least know of each other if they
Yeah.
don't actually know each other. So there is some of that coming into play. Uh, Connor also is feeling pretty good about Julia. Is a little bit wary of people who have already played the game before, just because they have that experience. As we see, you know, an interesting dynamic once we get to your tribe here, Margret, of how that's being perceived by everyone. And there's a lot of just like, you know, everyone on Ardonix is feeling that they kind of all seem to be gravitating towards the same people, which is the interesting thing, Logan, because it really seems like
Yeah, I
when
noticed
people are
that.
talking, it's like Erin and Julia's name are the two that are coming up. Did you get that vibe being on that tribe?
Yeah, definitely. I do think that like that group of 5 from the first vote that was all supposed to vote together, I do think was like the core of that that tribe of 7, if that exists. Um, yeah, and I noticed that too, and there were like little things that like as I was watching the season that like made me feel better about my vote out, or like it wasn't like just from me throwing out Brian's name. And I
Hmm.
did kind of pick up on that I was one of the ones saying that I felt close to like Erin and Connor and Meredith, I think were the names I had said. And I did pick up that everyone else was kind of saying those names and no one was really saying my name,
Mhm.
which I wasn't like upset about it. It made sense. I went out third. So yes, to longly answer your question, I did pick up on that.
All right, well, let's switch over to your tribe, Margaret, because this is where we get into the bulk of the episode. And we kind of get this interaction between Beth and Richard to start it, where Richard is suggesting, hey, Beth, I want to work with someone who's going to push back on me, is going to challenge my thoughts, and like make it so that I have to think things through and isn't like this yes person. And it's so funny to me because Beth in that moment is just being like very agreeable with it all
Yeah.
and like not do the opposite of what Richard is saying he wants, but we'll see what comes of that as we move through the game, potentially. And
Sorry, that's just kind of a funny line too, because like, is that other person supposed to say yes, I'll be that person for you, or are they
right,
supposed to
it's
push back
so
on that?
it's such a weird conundrum because it's
What do
like,
you want? Like, I get the concept, like I agree
yeah,
with it, but it's
like
I don't want someone to agree with you. I
yeah.
agree.
Yeah, and it's the thing. It's like you're making that bond, and I think it is a strong strategy too.
Funny.
You get into a room with someone, you're like, "Hey, I'm getting good vibes from you. Let's work. This is what I want out of a partner," and setting those guidelines. And I would love someone who pushes back a little bit. Obviously, is not in an adversarial way, in a collaborative way, just to challenge
Totally.
that thought process, which I think is what Richard's really trying to explain here. But it's just funny because you say that, and then it's like, how are you supposed to agree to it? Because if I agree to it, I'm doing exactly what you say you don't want me
And then
doing.
yeah.
Um, we see a little bit of talk between Emily and Ava, and they're talking. Ava mentions she doesn't want one of the women to go home. She'd like the woman to stick around. That doesn't happen this round. In fact, only woman names are put out there. So,
I was not a girl's girl this round.
well,
Big regret.
well, now we get into it, Margaret. It's time. It's time we finally address it. You're in a room with JB and Joseph,
Dangerous room.
and you say, "Hey, Emily's a bit quieter. We should vote her out."
That was I had truly, as I said, and like, and here, and I'll obviously follow it up with like how I know it looked. I truly had meant to throw Beth's name out, because obviously, like, because Emily, like, that was just not true as far as saying Emily was quiet. She absolutely was not. And then I realized when Emily popped in the room and it's like, "Oh, your name's out there," and I was like, "Wait, no, no, I did not. Oh shit, I'm gonna swear, bleep me out.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
shit,
fine.
oh shit."
Yeah.
Like that was so, and I think you see on my face, like I'm just like pulled all the way back, like, oh, like I know what I had just, like, I'm just like, I made a big mistake and there is no time to correct it. I did try to save face.
Mhm.
But I also like could hear, I'm like, no, now I'm just digging the hole. I'm just like, the hole's just getting deeper. Yeah, and I did not want to throw out my fellow returnee's name for sure. And but then that's what happened. And yeah, I think everyone can see like I genuinely had made a mistake, but I can definitely also see how in the game everyone's like, why are you like just own your just like just own it. And it's
Yeah.
like, I'm like, it's hard to own something that's not what I wanted to do.
What's really interesting about the entire situation is you specifically say, Emily's just not saying a lot, and I feel like that's a little weird, so we should go after Emily. The interesting thing is that no one pushes back on the fact that you're saying that, despite the fact that Emily's like filling every gap of silence in all of the conversations that are happening. And it's just like, wait, do you actually mean Emily? Because that description doesn't fit her.
Yeah, no, if I had said Beth, everyone would have been like, oh yeah, Beth, it like, because at that point in the game, like Beth was not, definitely not the most like verbal person like in the
Mhm.
holding room or anything. If anything, I thought it was me, and then I see like everyone being like, Margaret's actually kind of quiet. I was like, I was.
That's one of those things that's really hard to judge too, though, is that what's the perception everyone has of you based on, and I think especially like people who tend to talk more, tend to fill that space, get really self-conscious about it and kind of dial it back too far sometimes.
Yeah.
And vice versa. I think some people who are more quiet sometimes are like, oh, if I'm too quiet, everyone's going to be like, okay, I'm going to like, I'm just going to have to talk more and more because otherwise people are going to be targeting me. Like, again, that was, and I think that's a totally reasonable direction to take for a first vote here, right? It's, hey, Beth's a little quiet. I don't know what's going on with her. So does anyone else feel that way? And you just happen to say the wrong name because you've been playing a game for an hour, right? Like you haven't really had an opportunity to like talk about all these other people. Uh, so it is tough. And I think this is one of those things that really changes between the long game you previously played and the mini here, right? Where it's like you get that time to kind of get to know everyone beforehand. You get a handle of all of their names. This type of blunder could happen in a long game, but it's changed really quickly because you have the time to realize it and then the time to talk to everyone about it. Whereas in the mini, it's just like, I said the wrong name. Everyone knows I said the wrong name. And the other problem is it seemed like that name was gaining traction.
Yeah, yeah, it was one. I think I, kind of, even though I didn't like have the full gut feeling of I am definitely the one who's gonna go home, I definitely had the like, if I go home, I see the I could I was immediately post gaming like what I did wrong like
Mm-hmm.
before the vote even happened. And yeah, like because I know if I were in the long game, like my approach when I played the long game was I was like, if someone asks me for a Zoom, I'll hop on if I can. I will request as like as
Yeah.
like a one-on-one with people like that, like everyone would know that I'm like down to I would be down like, hey, I want to like get to know everybody just so I can like feel like I know where I'm at feel like I know where I'm at relationship wise with people. So like my in my what I when I went into the room with Joseph and JB, those were guys I wanted to work with. I should have just like instead of saying a name, I should have said, I want to work with you guys. What are you thinking? Because name throwing, whether it's a mini or long game, not my personal style. So I made the mistake of just not being true to how I would want to play a game anyway, and not being as like like it would I even in a mini and as fast as it goes, I needed to have restraint, like be bold, not be aggressive, especially when I'm not really an aggressive person. So
Well, we do see right after you have this conversation and Emily pops in and she's like, "Oh no, I made this mistake." We see Joseph's confessional saying he'd actually really like to work with you and JB moving forward. That's who he's kind of feeling on the tribe. And then we get JB talking to Richard and uh, tells them about you throwing out Emily's name, and it's just like, Margret caused us to lose this challenge, even though like one person does not cause you to lose this challenge. There are multiple pairs and steps and stuff. I get it. It was close, but uh, and then at that point, you know, it starts flipping onto you. Like JB's really starting to say, you know what? Maybe it's Margret we're supposed to go after here.
yeah, yeah. I again like perception is reality, so it was like even in the moment I like felt I felt that. And you see in my confessional like I had had enough time to like sort of having too much adrenaline to like stop. And so finally like having to talk about it, I was like I just like there I just was feeling so defeated. I was like I have no one to blame but myself. Like even if I had made it past the vote, I would understandably not be the most trusted person on my tribe. So yeah, I just did not set myself up for success with people I wanted to be allies with. So
Uh, yeah, and we even see because then we go into this conversation with you and Emily and how you do own up. I am so sorry. I threw out your name, and I meant to say best name. But at that point, it kind of felt like it was too much. And then Emily like straight up asked you, "Are you writing my name down?"
I did at that point I was like maybe there's a way I don't have to. And then but Yeah, and then one thing that would happen is if I was ever in a room with Joseph after that, he's like, "Oh, let's oh, let's you throw out Emily, we'll ride Emily," and I was like, and there was a way I felt I was like I'm being it was like I knew I was being set up, but I couldn't like. What am I gonna do? Write my own name down? Come on.
You can't do that. That is against the rules. Just so we're all clear, you cannot write your own name down.
Yeah, no, no, no.
Uh,
I was not gonna, this is Big Brother. I was not gonna self evict,
yeah.
but like, yeah.
So we see a bit of confusion. Like we see Emily's name gaining some momentum. JB's kind of pushing back on it, kind of throwing out your name instead. And we get this confessional from JB where he's feeling, or not a confessional, but he's in a group and he's saying, it feels like Margaret's kind of like following me around. Were you doing that? Or is that just
Yeah,
complete
yeah.
coincidence? You were.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because I wanted him to be an ally, and I felt it slipping away, so I was like doubling down, and that's not what you should do, but it's hard to stop.
And we get like this long sequence of like everyone kind of keeps end upping in the same room. And this is something that we do see happen a lot early in the minis is everyone's kind of like scared to not be in the rooms. But when there are 7 people available, that means, oh, there's probably only like 3 minutes of scramble time left. So it's really the time you need to be talking to people and solidifying plans. We get a confessional from Emily. Emily's like completely convinced it's her at this point because she's trying to push back. She's like, okay, let's go for Margret. Hey, let's do this. But she feels very disheartened in this confessional. Richard only heard your name, Margret, and then we kind of go into tribal council here. And I can't remember who said it. Someone in confessional said, keep playing. Or maybe it was you, Margret. Did you say keep playing like you're never getting pulled into a confessional?
I did. Yeah.
I think that is a brilliant way of approaching a mini because
good one.
and there's a lot of discussion in the minis about you see it in a lot of the scrambles of this idea of how long do we have? Do we know how long we have? Did they tell us how long we have? Fun fact, you have until confessionals are done and then a couple more minutes. That's always how our minis have worked. I don't know why no one's picked up on this, but that's how it works. And when you get to this point, like you're right, because the way confessionals work, where it's myself and Ian and Lily and Morgan sitting in a room, completely like we have no idea what's happening in the scramble rooms. We have no idea who's talking to each other. We just have our list and we're pulling people, and we just tell Carrie, send us this person. And when that happens, it's usually the most inconvenient time for the person we end up pulling. Not intentionally, sorry. We just have to do it because we have to get through all of these confessionals. And playing like you're not going to get pulled through a confessional is the absolute best way to do that because you just have to have that conversation. And worst comes to worst, when you come back, you can still try to complete that conversation because you've already started it at least. I think that is brilliant advice, Margret. I honestly think it is a fantastic approach to the game. Obviously, like didn't quite pay off this season, but I'm sure it will in the future at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, because when I got back from my confessional, Emily very decisively said, "Well, I know who I'm voting for, and I'm going to tree mail or whatever room." And I was like, as soon as I said that, that was really when I knew I was cooked. Like, I didn't have much hope going into my confessional, and when I got back, I was like, I'm probably done. I'm probably done.
And then, like, the other big thing that's happening at Tribal Council, Emily's really pushing this idea of I'm an experienced player. I've played a mini specifically before. I might have ideas of what's going on. I was rocked out because I was incredibly loyal to my person. And it kind of seems that maybe that's working. Maybe that's just Emily thinks that's working. We definitely get that in episode 3 where Emily definitely thinks, oh, maybe my pitch is working. Unbeknownst to her that JB is really the person pushing your name instead, which I think is very interesting to gauge here. But alas, Margret, it's a 6-1 vote, and you are the first returning player out of the game. So, summing up your experience playing this game, like how did you feel compared to the long game? Is there anything that you, other than like, maybe saying the right name or not even saying a name at all, is there anything you kind of regret not doing in the game?
I think, yeah, I think I regret that I did not, ins I felt like I gave into the temptation to say a name instead of saying, I want this to be an alliance.
Hmm.
Like, I realize now, like,
Mm.
in a mini that the bet, rather than going off, it's like safety before any offense. So that's the only, and I don't want to ever play like a lone wolf
Right.
game. So I think I just regret not making my like my loyalties clear, because I didn't want, like, I was very attached to my allies in my in Monte Carlo, and
Hmm.
so I had nowhere to go but down once it was like the 1-2 punch of losing them at the merge. So I but by the same token, you like I think I overcorrected by like not sticking my neck out there to say I want to work with you. That's the one regret I have. But other than that, hey, I tried. And even though I would have loved to have made jury, because that's where like the real bonding happens with, fellow players, I did get to go to an engagement party that I wouldn't have gone to otherwise that
There you
night.
go. Pluses, minuses, it happens. Speaking of like your relationships in Monte Carlo, obviously that was one of the things that you kind of wanted to change was you got too attached to some people. What from your Monte Carlo game did you want to bring into this game?
I think I feel like everything that made me a successful player in that game, I like tossed out the window for some reason. But I think I had wanted to bring in like an ally focused game, where it's like get to the merge, but I wanted, so like, have the people at my side. I just also wanted to see what it would be like if I was a little more, cutthroat once I got where I needed to go. But yeah, instead I was cutthroat right from the get go, which is like,
I mean, you know what? We learn, and that's what matters, right? And the differences between a long game and a mini don't seem like much when you start, but then you get into it and you're like, this is a completely different monster, and you have to handle it completely differently. So I get it, but again, we were so happy to have you back this season. Let's talk to Logan a little bit now, because Logan, you've been a little quiet there, and we got to get some talking here. At the beginning of episode 3, we we see this conversation that's happening on your tribe where you're talking about the dig site again, and Brien is completely forgetting what area he had said he searched in tribal council, and he even forgets David's name, calls him Chris. What were your
Yeah.
thoughts in this conversation?
Uh, just confusion. I mean, uh, this is all like a new concept to me as well. So I was even figuring out like the dig site myself and trying to like, I think even after I was like, oh, I should have remembered what everyone else said too. Like I know we all went in the 4 rows, so that was easy. But yeah, just more confusion and then just more like, see, I knew I was right. This is why. This is why I
So
voted for this guy.
is this conversation one of the reasons why Brien ended up being one of the name you ended up kind of pushing in this round? Was there just like
Oh,
too much
not.
distrust at that point?
I don't think that was like a huge factor. I mean, it wasn't something I ended up bringing up. I probably should have
Hmm.
in this round. That might have been good ammunition to sway it back over to him. Um, yeah, I think the main reason that I kind of tried to go for Brian was just that we were down in numbers and it was like a familiar target.
Hmm.
You know, easy for me now to say he wrote my name down, but funny like hearing me say back like, "Oh, it's 50% chance he wrote my name down." Um, I feel like too when you're kind of in that situation where at the swap where we were down 5-3, it was
Hmm.
almost just easier for me to throw one of Julia or Brian under the bus and be willing to flip. Um, and between those two, I was definitely going to choose Brian.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big things is like And let's get into this swap here because I think this is one of those
Yeah.
moments where I mean your tribe is speculating there's a swap based on like the number of colored swatches and stuff that you guys get before the game, and we do in fact get to a swap. You get there. There are some funky looking dinosaurs that you each get a pick, and then after you
Hmm.
pick them, it's revealed we're swapping down from 2 tribes out to 3 tribes with 4 people on them each. We get the new Ardonix tribe, which is Connor, Beth, Erin, Meredith. The new Tarchia tribe of Ava, Joseph, Brien, and yourself, Logan. And then the brand new Marciasaurus tribe, which is Julia, Emily, JB, and Richard. When you see the way that these tribes split up, because we have a tribe that is 3 original Ardonix and 1 Tarchia, then we have the inverse where we have 3 original Tarchia and 1 Ardonix, and then we have your tribe, which is the 2-2 tribe.
Hmm.
How did you feel about the way this swap worked out initially? Prior to like knowing that, hey, you're going to tribal council with another tribe, how did you feel
Awful.
about the way this worked out?
Awful.
Yeah.
Awful. It was like probably the worst swap that it could have happened for me. Um, yeah, just like thankfully we had to double tribal. It would have been exactly the same if we had to go to tribal with just that 4. It would have turned into me versus Brien again anyways.
Mhm.
Um, and then yeah, the fact that like the people that I had felt good about working with were all like in like Erin, Connor, Meredith, all getting swapped to
Yeah.
a tribe together was kind of stung, like it. Um, yeah, no other way to say it. Just a terrible swap for me. Classic swap screwed, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way Survivor works sometimes, right? You got to be lucky sometimes. Sometimes you get unlucky. Like for every
It
person who
happens.
gets lucky on Survivor, there's someone who's unlucky.
It happens. Yeah.
So we get into this immunity challenge. It is the Jurassic Jumble. It's a word scramble. It's a word scramble race. Yes, Margaret.
Can I just say, if that had been the challenge on the second round, I would have killed that.
The luck thing again,
That
right? Sometimes the challenges land in the right order for you. Sometimes they just don't. Well,
that prehistoric word was
That was
like
hard.
leagues harder than any other word up there. There's like by far, by far.
I will promise you the words did get harder, but you all just did like so poorly in that challenge that one tribe swept it, so you didn't get to see how
It
much
was like
harder they are. But
8 in the morning at that point.
to make you feel better, Logan, in challenge testing for this, I also said Triceratops when
Ah, cool.
prehistoric came up. So you're not
Hell
the
yeah.
only one. The instinct, and I think it's just because of the way that the word was scrambled, had that like
Yes.
had top, and it's like, oh, it's
The
obviously
eyes, the
Triceratops, and it's
T. I
like,
was like, I see some eyes, I see a
yeah,
T. Yep, boom. Uh,
there's no H in Triceratops though.
I just had to go quick too.
Yeah,
I think we were already down. Like that was
you're
the
down
game
3-0,
point
right? Like
there.
that
So it
that was
was like,
the
yeah, so it was like first thing that came to mind.
mhm.
Uh,
And I think in this type of challenge, that is the approach to make, right? We also see
totally.
uh JB screws up in that first round where he says fossil, and it's like there's 3 S's there. Oh, I guess it's fossils. And we see Julia get the point instead, right? Or Erin get the point instead. It's it's tough, right? Like sometimes
Yeah.
you want to be fast, you want to get it, especially when you're competing against 2 different tribes and only one tribe gets the point. But unfortunately, man, Ardonix just smoked you, Gallo.
Yeah. It was made me feel better, like it's not like it was close or we lost
Mhm.
it by 1. It was like, well, that was terrible.
But unfortunately, the tribe that won was the one that had your 3 former allies on it. And instead, you now
I
have to go
know.
to tribal council with a minority from your original tribe in this like 2 swaps. And there's a really interesting dynamic that happens in this where there's a question of do we stick to original tribal lines or
Hmm.
new swap tribe lines? How much does any of it
Hmm.
matter? And this question of like, hey, we're moving towards a merge. Like it's got to happen soon-ish. How much do we
Yeah.
even care about these small tribes? So what was that conversation like for you?
For me, minimal.
Mhm.
Um, I think I was just trying to get through that vote. Um, and yeah, I wasn't really in that position to be making like long-term plans or like solidifying allies because I was in that minority and felt like I was in the hot seat. Um, I think if I were like if I think I were people on was it the Marshasaurus tribe
Mhm.
at that point, I think that would be a perfect time. And I think that is kind of what happened for them to kind of like lock in their groups and start settling in for the next couple rounds. Um, and trying to figure out like what my experience was like during that voting round.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had started initially maybe in a room with Brien,
Hmm.
and we see the scene where he puts out Richard's name, and I'm very unenthusiastically, I'm like, "Yo, sure, I'm down." Which even when I looked it back, I'm like, Jesus, like sell it a little bit better. My God. I yeah, I think I just went into that round like I said earlier, like down to just focus in on cutting out Brien, I think, and not trying to flip two people over and rally Brien and Julia and pull off this big blindside because I didn't think it could happen. Um, so I did that by listening to Brien's plan. Um, he wanted to vote out Richard, and I think I had said like, oh, should we do like Richard or I forget even who I said. Um, but he's like, no, no, let's do Richard. Immediately go to the room. Richard, where are you? I need to talk to you. Like I immediately went and ratted out that plan. Um, in hopes that that was kind of like, you know, could be the move. They were trying to decide on the name. If they see me willing to flip, cool. Like, let's go with it. Um, and then I kind of like spent the rest of the rest of the round trying to rally numbers onto the Brien vote rather than do anything else.
I think that is the way to approach this vote because the interesting thing about the way the swap votes works is like it almost, despite the fact that Julia ends up swapping to a 3-1 disadvantage in original tribe members, it almost
Mm-hmm.
advantages her because of the fact that two tribes are going to tribal council and only voting one person out because they're incentivized to keep her so that they have an easy vote if they go to tribal council again. Whereas everyone on your tribe is incentivized to kind of like split one of you and Brien up so that there isn't a rock situation if you as a four go to tribal council.
Yeah, and
So
I
I
think even looking back at the episode, I think Brien, I think he had a decent approach, a decent pitch to Ava and Joseph too, of saying like, you can vote for me the next round, like
mhm.
so. Um, yeah, props to him for that.
Yeah, I think it made sense for
Um,
both of you to kind of go after each other just by the way that this all broke down.
yeah, and just all like the prehistory too, like with
Mhm.
the vote and everything. Yeah, never and I never wished more that I just voted for David instead than during that round. I was like, why did I have to vote for Brien and cause all this? Um, it did kind of watching the episode back. I did feel a little like relieved that it maybe is like order, at least in the order of confessionals. I'm assuming this is how it happened. That like JB, Joseph, Richard had already kind of settled on my name beforehand. Before I came in with the information about
Yeah.
Brien. Perfect. Because in my head, like the way I saw it is like, oh dang, like I did all that scrambling and then they were scared by it and voted me out. So it was a little like more comforting to know that that plan is kind of already in place. They were a little just a bit more like just threatened across the board in general. Um, and then I tried stirring it up. So felt nice. It's always nice to get
Yeah.
taken out because you're a threat.
Yeah. I mean, there is that conversation that we see of that original Tortilla tribe just getting together and being like, hey, like, so Logan or Brien, like, we're just going to go Logan here. So it
Yeah.
was like an initial response. Absolutely. Margret, one of the things we see from this new Ardonish tribe, though, is, and Logan's hinted at it already, we see this conversation between Connor and Beth. And Connor is just asking, like, how'd you get into the game? And Beth's like, well, my brother is John's roommate. And he is. He's in the apartment right now. And we then see Connor's like, wait, Trent's your brother? Like, I know Trent, and like we met, and obviously, like we have friend circles and everything. I knew Beth and Connor hadn't met I knew that wasn't an issue. Didn't know Connor had been in Beth's basement before, though. That was new information to me.
House that she was in.
Yeah,
That was
that she
crazy.
was currently sitting in.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, as I said to John off camera, I was like, wow, my bad karma of even thinking Beth's name was just like gonna catch up if I had stayed.
Yeah, right.
With that. Yeah, yeah, that was another mistake going into this that I made, which is I'm like, I should just assume that somehow everyone is like, it has been in each other's weddings or something, like some real close level of relationship that an unbreakable bonds, like, as opposed to like, we're just strangers hanging out.
I
Well,
have
as
family
we
that's Canadian from small towns, and it's like, everyone does know each other, or it's like, cousins somehow, and you try not to think, like, no, they don't all know each other. It's like, do all these Canadians here know each other? Like, is this really,
well, okay,
really how it is?
to be fair, I recruit a lot of these Canadians, so there is a possibility.
That's fair.
I'm not in a
Yeah.
small town. Like my area has like a 200,000 person population, so it's smaller, but it's not like tiny. It's not like the
Acceptable.
middle of nowhere, Canada. Um, and there is like these connections, but again, like they didn't actually know each other. But this is again one of those instances I think of where we see
Yeah.
people just like bonding over these similar things.
You're not
right?
gonna
Like,
not work together. You're not gonna not
yeah,
work together after that, Yeah, like you're
Mhm.
gonna feel real weird. Like it's a good thing Meredith was there to see that at least. Like,
yes.
um,
So yeah,
because it's like okay, can't tell Beth or Connor anything about each other. That's
yeah.
yeah.
If I'd been in Meredith's shoes, I would have been like, ah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, we even see Meredith's response to it, right? Where Meredith's like, I thought we had a 3-1 advantage. Maybe that's not a 3-1 advantage anymore.
Yeah, it turned 2-2
Yeah.
real quick.
Yeah.
But I think it really does go to
Water
show
got
how
muddied.
small the org community is, right? Like even those people who don't play orgs, there's a potential that they know someone who knows someone in the community,
Yeah.
and that's enough to connect them, right? Like it's not as close of a connection as we see like what Erin played with Joseph and Ava previously, and like all those type of things. And I talked about it on last week's after the snuff as well, right? Like there's only so much we can do to keep people from actually knowing each other in a community that's so small. Yes, it's large, it's vast, it spans the globe, but these people all like playing
Yeah.
games, so they're all playing with each other anyways, or they know someone who's played with them, and it just sneaks up on us sometimes.
And everything that Aaron and Joseph were saying about each other in confessionals, I'm just like, oh, I don't know what it ended up looking like, but I was like, oh, there's drama coming.
Well, I can tell you, eventually I will be asking them about it because I want to know the drama. So we get into the vote, and we've kind of already been through it here, Logan. So I mean, we can kind of just
Yeah.
like speed run it here.
What?
A lot of conversation about, okay, how do we do this? You, Brien, and Julia are in the minority, despite the fact that you're not in a minority on your tribe. And like I already mentioned, Julia is kind of insulated by the fact she's the only person on her 4-person tribe. And we see that right away. We
Mhm.
see when Julia gets with that Marshasaurus tribe, they all are like, yeah, so we don't want to vote any of ours out. Let's vote one of those other two out.
Julia's a magnet. Everyone wants to work with Julia. Like I get it now. Like I see it. I didn't realize like until like draft and everything, all the hype around Julia, but it's well deserved. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the big thing is just that push from you and Brien against each other the entire time. The thing that I found really interesting, both of you approached Ava and Joseph and were like, hey, I know we don't really want to vote someone off our tribe, but can we vote the other person off our tribe?
Yeah, please, not me. Yeah.
So how does that feel? Like, how do you approach that in that situation? Because how do you not lose power in a situation like this where you are going into tribal council with another tribe?
Yeah. It's kind of tough. I feel like maybe what I should have done is that you just kind of pitch like cohesiveness rather than numbers, saying that like we could be a tight three. Like I could have gone and said, I have nobody in this game. Ava, Joseph, if you spare me tonight, I will lock in with you two right now. Like I will be I can be your pawn for whatever next round. We can be a tight three moving forward. And just like pitch my case of why I'm more trustworthy than Brien without like over pitching and becoming untrustworthy. So
Mhm.
just a lot of weird lines, and it's strangers, and you have an undetermined amount of minutes. So yeah, just a lot to handle.
Yeah. And we see Brien doing exactly that, right? When we see Brien's conversation with Ava and Joseph, he's like, let's be a tight three. And if it
Yeah,
comes to it, you can vote me out.
he did everything I said I should have done. It's just like you just don't want to over scramble sometimes. You don't want to stir it up too much.
That balance between playing too hard and not playing enough is so hard
Hmm.
to find. It is
Yeah,
very difficult, especially in a situation where this is all that's going on, right? Like you're in a brand new situation, you're in a minority, you are with a bunch of other people, and you're just trying to figure everything out. And then there's the fact that, like, one of the other things that really comes around that I think does a very disservice to your tribe is the conversation around that first vote. That it was a 4-1-1-1. And it
yeah,
seemed to really push Julia away from wanting to work with either of you.
yeah, yeah, and probably me because I was the one who admitted that I defected from a plan that involved Julia. So I like indirectly already showed Julia that she couldn't trust me to follow along with the plan. So it's like I yeah shot myself in the foot twice by doing it and then telling people that I did it. Um, dang, there was I think another kind of factor that could have played into it that I heard people saying was like that Brien will be a threat later down the road that they could get rid of. And I think that kind of plays into a little bit of like maybe my lack of experience in orgs and maybe Brien being the known entity. I'm
Mhm.
kind of more so it's the devil they don't know versus they people might have played or know Brien or kind of has his reputation before. So they knew what they were getting with him.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because there is that conversation of like, Brien's just an easy vote later on, whatever. Like, if we get in the situation again, we can just vote Brien. No one's really sure where Logan's sitting right now. So what's going to happen here? And speaking of Brien, we do have that conversation between Brien and Julia towards the end of the episode where Brien tells Julia about the legacy advantage. Risky thing to do. We learned that from from Survivor Game
Yeah.
Changers. Don't
From
tell people about
history.
legacy advantages because they tend to get voted out. You tend to get voted out after you tell people that exists. But Julia reciprocates and tells Brien about her question
Yeah.
advantage and her shot in the dark. It almost seems like you're almost drawing dead here because you don't have anything like that to share
I
in the
can
situation.
tell you where I dug a fossil, yeah. But yeah,
And then again, we get into tribal council here. There's a conversation of like, is it the mix up? Is it the original tribe? Like, what really matters? Um, it's a chaos inducing round because there's so many different little things getting into it. But we get through tribal council. Julia decides to use her question advantage in the voting booth and ask when the merge is coming, and it's told it will be coming at the final 10. And then it is a vote 6 against you, Logan, and 2 against Brien. So you had someone vote with you, which is always nice.
yeah. I thought it was Richard for like ever.
Mhm.
He even like told me after the game that it was him, and then I found out after that it was Joseph. So I don't know why you would lie about that, Richard. Okay.
So
Um,
unfortunately, you're voted out. What was your experience? Like, how did you feel about the game you played, and like, what do you kind of wish you maybe did a little differently?
yeah. I think I've kind of said everything like that I wish I'd done differently. Obviously, like just go along with that first vote would have saved me like a world of headaches. Um, I don't know. I kind of wish I was like, it's weird looking back at myself on camera. I wish I was like
Mhm.
a little bit more like active and like awake and my eyes looked a little bit different, but here we are. It was 7 in the morning then, so
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I had a blast. Like I felt very settled. Like when I got voted out, like I got voted out and I was like, well, I know exactly why that happened. Like that was okay. Like there wasn't any kind of like unrest about it. I had a lot of fun. I'm glad I was finally able to make it happen. It's been a thing that's like I've been trying to do for a long time, but my work schedule doesn't really allow me to play the long form games
Mhm.
because I work nights. So yeah, I always have fun when I can play a mini.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun, and I mean, obviously, we were very happy to finally get you into a season. There's only
It
one way
makes
for
sense that I
us.
was the last draft pick too. I'm not mad about it.
Hey, I was happy to have you put on
I
my
know. I'm
draft team. I
sure.
was happy to get gifted you.
I was like, I was wondering going in, I was like, all right, whose team am I gonna wreck going in? Like, who's gonna take me, and I'm just gonna destroy their team.
Um,
But
big, big same.
yeah. So yeah, going last, I still felt like I was a good value pick.
I agree. I honestly, I think everyone's a value pick, and like, yes, there's an order with this
Yeah.
season, but like, it was a very part of the reason why I was just like, I'm taking first pick is because I didn't want to have to choose between multiple people later on. I was like,
Fair
just give
enough.
me
Yeah.
someone,
Make
give me
one
this.
choice. Yeah.
Um, there's only one way for us to wrap up after the snuff. Margaret, how would you describe your game in one word?
It's 2 words: insanity mode.
Okay, okay.
Mm.
And Logan, obviously, same question to you. How would you sum up your game in one word?
I'm gonna leave some breadcrumbs. I'm gonna say untapped.
Hey, I like it. I like it. Well, thank you both
Yeah.
for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with both of you. However, too soon it actually is to have this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We are on a holiday break. I mean, we got the holidays here. You have to wait until January 6th before another episode of Como Bluff drops, but it's coming. Don't worry, it's there. I'll be back on January 12th with another episode of After This Enough and our next two voted out contestants. So, in the meantime, like the video, subscribe to the channel so you get that reminder when that new episode is dropping in January, and we'll see you then. Have a good night, everyone.